Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. We have a great treat for us, which is our brother Carlos. We've been hanging out. I'm here in Dallas, and we're kind of talking about his story. And it's really something amazing, and I wanted to share it with the world. MashaAllah, our brother Carlos comes from a very interesting background. We're going to share some pictures of him in his prior life, I guess you could say. But I'm going to let him talk about it himself. So tell us about your background and your religion before, and what you were doing before you were Muslim.
MashaAllah, so, as I was telling you earlier, I come from a very hardcore Protestant Christian background, specifically from my father's side. My great-grandparents were missionaries and they planted churches in Mexico. The churches, some of them which are still being run today by some of my own uncles and family members.
From Spain?
Yeah, from Spain. So I have also other uncles in the Houston area where I'm originally from. 3 churches that are from my own uncles, one aunt. So we come from a very heavily influenced Protestant Christian background, like I said, specifically from my dad's side. My parents migrated from Mexico to the U.S. and my dad, who was a youth pastor prior to coming to the U.S., he kind of left the religion. Right? You come to America, you work, get caught up in things of the dunya, as you say. Right? And that's what happened with my father. He left the church, he started drinking. And so we never grew up going to church, but I knew about church because he would go sometimes when my grandma was in town. So my dad wanted to look good.
Show, right?
Yeah, he had to show that he was still going, take it till you make it. So, alhamdulillah, I enjoyed those times because I got to learn a little bit about who God was, according to the Christian belief. And I was interested because my parents, like I said, they weren't going to church, but they always instilled in our hearts to fear God, to do good, to be good to people. But as you grow up, as I was growing up, you start rebelling against your parents. My parents weren't doing good in their marriage, ended up getting divorced. So I ended up growing up in the streets, in the barrio, in the hood.
Django,
I don't want to mention any names, but yeah, so, in Houston, very well-known gangs. So started getting involved in some of that action. And it came to a point in my life where I needed to get away from that because I knew that if I stayed in that environment, I was either going to get shot or go to jail. Because that's against life. So I wanted to leave that. So what I ended up doing after the age of 16, I believe, 17, I left Houston to live with my grandparents from my father's side, who, as I said, are very hardcore Christians. My grandparents helped Protestant. So they also planted churches. They were working in ministry, always heavily involved in church. And so that kind of influenced me to begin looking into Christianity. And as I mentioned to you earlier, one of the other aspects before I forget is that within the Protestant church, there's kind of this indirect teaching to dislike Muslims, right? Because a lot of Protestants are very pro-Israel. Right? So
it's kind of funny, right? I mean, technically, if you look at the Bible, you say like Jews killed Jews. I don't know how you become whatever.
So in that time period, I also began to, while I was getting involved in the church, I also began to grow about hate towards Muslims. Right? So one of my goals when I graduated high school, I said I'm going to go join the Marines so I can go fight in God. Right? I wanted to go kill Muslims. That was my goal. But I was, getting ready to sign up for the Marines. My mother, she saved me from getting into that. Right? She was crying. She was saying, "Don't leave. Come back to Houston." Because I was living with my grandparents. I said they were South Texas, near the border of Mexico. She was like, "Don't leave. Come back to Houston, and we'll find a church over here." Like I told you, my parents weren't practicing, but when my mother saw that I was practicing, she started to want to get involved in church.
You were all heavy into it.
I was more heavy into it than anybody in my family. So I ended up not joining the Marines. And I said to myself, if you can't kill him, convert him.
There you go.
So that was one of my mottos. Or try. So I came back to Houston, and we found a church. We were heavily involved. I was already baptized from the previous church, so I found a church with similar beliefs, and I started attending that church. The pastor liked me. He was like, you know what, I see you have good dealings with the church, so we're going to involve you in ministry. So I started getting involved in ministry, started doing, I was a musician in the church. I used to play bass guitar, and also I was a youth minister, youth pastor. Right? And a lot of times I would also go preach at non-denominational churches. So that kind of went against what my church was for, but I also did a lot of activities outside of my home church at the time. And
you be singing and playing?
I would just play guitar and preaching, bass guitar and preaching, right? So at the same time, I was going to the College of Biblical Studies in Houston.
Nice.
Right? And
you are well versed in the Bible.
I learned a couple of things. I took a couple classes and was learning. So as I was telling you earlier, I was attending those classes, but outside of the classroom environment, you would see some of the students who would get involved in more academic discussion, theology, Calvinism, Lutheranism, and all these other isms. So you start hearing them, and then you start questioning what you believe. So in that time period, I was also questioning whatever I was being taught at church. Forgot to mention another point is during that process as well, I was taking missionary courses. Because as I said earlier, you can't kill the converted. So one of my points was if I couldn't join the Marines to go kill Muslims, then I was going to go. My goal was to go to Africa and to do to some Christian dawah to the people in Africa. So I have PowerPoints, I have stuff like how to convert Muslims to Christianity, or how to bring them closer to Christ, right? So I would attend those classes, and now looking back at it, you're like, man, this stuff is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And
it's interesting the amount of effort and time and thought that goes into Christians trying to trick Muslims out of Islam.
Yeah.
My wife was recently shopping, developed a bayana, and some lady brought her a little pamphlet. It says Jesus in the Qur'an. So it looks like it's about Jesus in the Qur'an. When you open it, it's all about like anti-Islamic stuff, right?
Sorry.
Which is funny because why can't you be honest about it?
So it's true. Like trying to get involved with the missionary, I was reading a lot about Islam, and Islam was always a very interesting religion to me because I always saw like the unity of people praying. You see pictures and videos of the haram and people praying there, and that it kind of stirs something in your heart. You're like, man, that's beautiful. But so I was very interested in Islam. I wanted to bring those people to Christ. They were good people, they're always doing good stuff. They're lost. So I was reading about Islam, but every time that I would read about Islam, it was from a Christian perspective. Right? You go to websites, you look up Islam, and you come up across these sites, and they're written by men who are called John or Ray, right? David, like a bunch of people who probably never studied Islam in their life except just to pick out, whatever verses they found that were problematic and wanted to make a big deal about it.
The disease in the heart doesn't let them see.
So I was reading those books, and as I mentioned to you, there was a guy named Ernie Khan. You can look him up. Absolutely hilarious. If you want to see him speak Arabic, it'll make you laugh. I had a lot of his books, and those were the books that I would use to kind of try to understand Islam, so I can refute Islam, and so I can bring this book to Jesus. It turned out the guy was a fraud. Right, he got exposed for it.
Just like every other Christian missionary out there.
He was the president of Liberty University, one of the top Christian universities in the U.S. The guy got exposed, and they took him off, and they fired him. So at that point, I was like,
the dude that said his dad was a Muslim.
Yes,
he didn't know how to read the Quran.
Yeah. So at that point, I was like, man, what am I doing reading about Islam from these people who don't even know about Islam? So what I ended up doing is I went out of my way. In Houston, we have Darussalam. So I went to Darussalam, bought a couple of little books. Yeah, bought a couple of books. The brother even handed me some free books. And I would study from that, read online from what I thought at the time, or what were seemed to be accurate Islamic sources. I would look into it. within that time when I was going to church and questioning my pastor once told me, you have to believe whatever I teach you because I'm the pastor. So
Just believe.
yeah, so at that point I said this is enough, I can't do this anymore. I ended up leaving the church, and within that year period after that I left the church, I was reading a lot into Islam because I didn't stop believing in God, I just didn't believe in the way that I was taught.
That's the thing with a lot of atheists too. They don't have a problem with God or the Creator. Their problem is Christianity.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah, the belief in God still exists. It's just the nonsense that people made up because they got pushed out.
Yeah, so I didn't lose my faith in God. I knew there was a God. I knew God existed. So I just didn't know which direction to go. But as I was learning about Islam, reading about Islam, in my heart I felt that this is correct. So I went to a masjid, local masjid, and I met a brother there who introduced me to the imam. I asked the imam a couple questions. Within a 2-month period of asking him questions, I didn't fully understand everything about Islam, but I knew in my heart that this was absolutely 100% correct. And so I decided, you know what, I don't know everything, but I'm going to take my shot. Because I knew this was something. So that's what I ended up doing. I've been Muslim for 8 years now. It's been a journey. As I told you, my mother, whenever she found out I became Muslim,
that must have been hard because your family was like hardcore preachers and ministers, and you were running churches from your grandfather's time. So I could imagine that was not easy.
Yeah, it was kind of difficult. As I said, my mom, she started getting involved in church because of me, right? So when she saw that I left the church and converted to Islam, and she was like bawling her eyes out while she was cutting meat in the kitchen, and it was very, very hurtful. So it was a process. Alhamdulillah, my family now is very accepting of me. I'm married, have kids. See, my kids are Muslim. They see their akhlaq.
They see the change in you.
They see the change.
So
in
you're
you.
not gangbanging anymore. You're
Nah.
not out there doing all that nonsense.
So,
Alhamdulillah, you're seeking knowledge. MashaAllah, doing da'wah.
so
Living a clean life. No alcohol, no drugs, no pork. Even people involved in the church, you still see them doing all the same stuff.
Yeah.
You still see them getting drunk and doing all that. Alhamdulillah.
yeah, alhamdulillah. So we're here today, man, calling people to Islam, and what a blessing it is.
Allah, it's a big inspiration, mashallah. When I met the brother and I heard his story, I had to share it because, you see a lot of fake ex-Muslims out there, right? You see a lot of people out there, I used to be this. We had one guy at the park, I used to be an imam. We told him, what's the adhan? And he just said, Allahu Akbar, repeat it, and he didn't know Shahadatain, he didn't know Hayya ala Salah. He's like, guys, all these guys fake it. But here you have somebody real who was a minister, whose whole family. We got pictures. I mean, we're not playing here, right? Inshallah, tell the brothers to use the picture, the thumbnail, so you can see it already, right? But alhamdulillah, Allah guided him. Even with all that hatred and all that stuff, Allah guided him. Not just that, the inspiration here is not just that he became Muslim, mashallah, but he's talib ilm. He's studying, mashallah, he's on the right aqidah, he's not messing with all that nonsense, goofy stuff, mashallah. He's on the Qur'an with Sunnah, he's moving forward, he's a da'i, he's a caller towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give our brother Abu Sumayya istiqamah, and myself, everybody watching. We want people to share this story, especially if you know somebody who's out there that's a minister, or that's somebody trying to preach to Muslims, to kind of listen to it. And they might be feeling the same thing he was talking about, like in their heart, they see the Haramain, they see the Muslim Salah, they hear the Adhan, and it attracts them. But they're like, they're caught up in that family or in that environment. So maybe this story will inshallah inspire people to accept Islam. Wa jazakumullahu khairan.